If you clicked on this video, know that you are special. You are not like most people. And of course, I am boosting your ego when I say this, but I do sincerely mean it. Because most people instinctively recoil when they see the word ego. They think that self-deception is something that doesn't apply to them, and that the ego is some loose, airy-fairy concept, when the ego is the absolute most important aspect of personal development for every single person, every single day. It's what's determining this entire societal structure that we're having right now in the way you relate to yourself and reality. It's the cause of self-deception and the self-sabotage, and what makes you feel authentic or inauthentic around other people. To understand where we're going with this entire guide here, I will give you a broad overview of the full scope of what we're going to talk about. We're going to cover what the ego is, to understand that it is an operating system with objective laws you can actually observe and understand. We're going to talk about the mechanics of deception, where your mind is literally designed to lie to you and keep you safe, which eventually leads you to the feelings of anxiety, neuroticism, and the sense that you're being stuck in life. Then I'm going to cover the 3-layer architecture that I've developed, how your identity is basically like a house built on a biological foundation, supported by a social pillar, and then covered up by a narrative, which is the roof. Then we're going to discuss the physical contraction you can actually sense in your body when the ego gets activated, how it actually feels to be challenged, and how to identify the ego in yourself and other people, more so than a concept, but an actual visible thing. Then we're going to cover emotional maturity, why narcissists often have the most fragile structures, or like ego structures, and how to actually build resilience and real emotional maturity. And finally, we're going to cover how you can move from being the victim of your own ego to building an entire architecture that aids your sense of personal satisfaction and existential ease with life. So by the end of this video, you understand what the ego is and how you can actually develop yourself in a way that, shifts your relationship to reality in an existentially satisfying way. Because most people, like I said, do not want to learn this stuff, because it's threatening and goes into the root of most of societal issues. Your ego is your sense of identity. It is something that you do not want to look at objectively, because looking at it objectively is threatening to your identity. Because it both feels extremely real and important, but the more you look at it, it also starts to feel fake. You have a personality, but this personality changes depending on who you talk to. Your tone of voice, your vocabulary, or your posture changes if you're talking to your boss, and when you're talking to your mom, or when you're talking to your best friend. You have a sense that there is a clear identity there, but then also you kind of morph and shift depending on who you talk to. And this isn't really about being fake, but it's your ego, your identity, adjusting its mask to ensure the specific identity you want to project out into the world. And this identity is then what wants to feel protected and validated. The depth of what I'm talking about here is not something that I knew when I started with all of this work. I took psychedelics and worked on my desire for existential fulfillment, and eventually built a business guiding hundreds of people through this territory, just to realize that this dynamic of social masking and desire for personal improvement is just the tip of the ego's iceberg. And every aspect of your life relates to your ego. How fulfilling and truthful your life is, and how you can move ahead and shift your own experience. The ego is a concept that relates to a lot of psychoanalysis and psychology, and also to a lot of esoteric mysticism. But despite all of these different aspects of what the ego is being seen as, there's an entire architectural structure that I've mapped out. You can look at it objectively and divorce it from all these esoteric concepts. So I'll say it now, and I'll mention it throughout this video multiple times, as this is my main work. I do ego architecture audits with people. These are one-on-one conversations where I move people through a protocol to analyze and judge their ego. This protocol moves through multiple steps of the self-identity, so you can get an objective look at how you are constructing your sense of self. This protocol mixes the understanding of psychoanalysis and non-duality, into an experience that serves to make people understand themselves better. I've helped hundreds of people in one-on-one conversations, both through the process of learning how to guide people and also through my personal relationships and YouTube. And throughout these years, then I developed a protocol in order to be able to repeat this depth of self-understanding more reliably. And the reason for the fact that it's so difficult for people to get into real contact with themselves is that the ego, by definition, is self-sabotaging. It's self-deceiving. It lies, and it doesn't want you to discover what it actually is doing to you. Now I'll give you a simple definition of what the ego is, and you'll start to notice that throughout this guide, the definition will get deeper and deeper as we're getting more specific of all of the different facets of what the ego is. But to start off simple, the ego is what constructs your sense of self. It runs all of your processes in the background, and therefore is constructed out of your beliefs, your ideologies, your self-image, your emotions, and your repeated behaviors that run your day-to-day life. It gives you a sense of context for your life and narrates the history from your birth since your death. It is the key for your personal life satisfaction, your sense of confidence, or your sense of judgment of how good or bad you are as a person. This is both for your own sense of self-view, like how you're judging yourself, but it's also the key component in how you're judging and relating to other people. It's what motivates people to build businesses and become successful and be seen as a good person. It's the main driver that gives us the need to have a good image in front of other people. So the ego lives in social interactions, because this is where we have influence over how other people perceive us. This caring for how other people perceive us is the main fuel that keeps the ego functioning. And then when we are alone, we basically ruminate on the sense of self-perception with ourselves. In the human mind, it is a feature as foundational as consciousness itself. And despite knowing that it's the thing that our entire sense of identity is made out of, we don't really hear people talk about it that much. Like it's always in some sort of either negative context or in a way to judge others. In spiritual circles, it's very common to say that you need to destroy or reject the ego or dissolve it. It's often being dismissed then as a consequence, because the idea is that you need to transcend it or to, somehow kill it. So as a consequence, people just don't pay much attention to it because they think that if they pay attention to it, they actually strengthen it. In psychological work, the ego is the subject of study, but it's not really named directly to clients either, because therapists are trained to be really careful to not judge the client, because when you judge the client, often what comes with this is just an entire baggage of ego dynamics that is often carefully avoided, especially because as therapists also carry their own ego, they don't want to bring the baggage that they carry for themselves with the client. Often it's also because it's not entirely agreed that the ego is an objective and measurable thing. And then in colloquial life, we treat ego as synonymous to narcissism or arrogance or self-obsession. We say things like, this guy has a big ego. But oftentimes what we really mean by that is that he just thinks too highly of themselves, or that he is very neurotic or aggressive, because when you talk to him, he gets easily defensive. So first, we can acknowledge that we don't really treat the ego as something good. We usually use it to judge other people with this label. Also, let's acknowledge that there's something icky about this topic for most. Like it implies some sort of personal failure or sense of vulnerability. So it's pretty good to start off with saying that, everyone has an ego. Also, most people are their egos, and they can't literally distinguish the difference between their true self and their ego self. It's all seen as one. So people identify with their beliefs as their true self. That's why it's so difficult to convince somebody that they're wrong about something, because it attacks the identity itself. The reason for that gets a bit paradoxical and complex, but it will make sense throughout this guide why this is the case. Because more so than a cold definition of thoughts and beliefs, the way to come in real contact with the ego is by reflecting your own self, your own felt sense of identity. Who do you think you are? Who do you want to be? Who should you be? Whatever answer feels right for you is a thread that can be pulled that leads to your sense of identity. So I use the word identity a lot during this video as well, but just know that I'm referring to the ego. Now, the ego does not like to be looked at directly. Self-reflection and personal investigation does not come natural to people for a very good reason. Because the ego is full of shit. It lies to yourself, and it makes you suffer. It limits your potential, and it hates, is jealous, and it is the sense that you don't like to be in your skin. You don't like to be a human, and you'd rather be at another point in your life. This is the case for most people, and it is a reflection of an identity that is not comfortable. But if you're not going to become an enlightened monk and rid yourself of all of your possession and everything in your environment that is keeping you being in this loop of just being yourself, you're not going to get rid of the ego. You're not going to get rid of your sense of identity. Getting rid of it is the wrong goal, because what people try to do is they start to believe they are superior to others. The goal to diminish the ego actually strengthens it for most people, because we can then compare ourselves to other people, and it becomes a competition about who's more humble or who cares less about their own self-perception, which, ironically enough, is complete ego fuel. Wanting to get rid of your ego sooner or later will look like arrogance, because you are going to be ignorant about yourself. The most effective way to get rid of the ego is to not pretend it's not there, but to look at it directly and objectively. If you don't do this honestly, what you will do is you will just pretend that it's not there, or you'll pretend that you can't see it, or you never actually learn to identify it. And then what is left is just ignorance. And then ignorance will drive every decision of your life, as it does for most people. So what I'm advocating for is an objective method to look at the ego and take it seriously. To treat the ego as any other part of your body's operating system. Like your heart is beating blood throughout your body, as your brain is thinking, as your stomach is digesting. Your ego is a driving engine that can also be monitored and cared for. When somebody gives you a piece of constructive criticism and you feel this inner tension rise, this sense of heat often happening in the lungs or in the head, that senses, okay, you're going to be shown something about yourself from another person's perspective, and you don't really know how you're going to react. This sense of defensiveness that is running through your body, that automatically wants to protect itself from its own self-perception. There you can see the ego happening live. And when you ever get triggered in this way, you can see it as an opportunity to be aware of what the ego is. The trick is to notice that however the other person is making you feel is really on you. It's you that is feeling this sense of defensiveness. And this awareness that how you're reacting internally is really your own reality filter. The goal is not to demonize it, as it's part of yourself. Demonizing doesn't work. It just creates even more anxiety and neuroticism, and more of the sense that you should be different, or your identity is not the right identity, and therefore you are socially anxious and just always uncomfortable about where your life is at. The goal should be to structure your ego in a way that serves your well-being and serves your life and other people. I'd even say that egotistic altruism is the only way to truly be kind for most people. Because if you have a strong sense of self and you care about yourself first, then you also understand that other people feel the same, And the best society is a society where everybody cares about themselves while also understanding that the other person has the same sense of self, with the same sense of importance. Because it requires you to have a healthy relationship to your identity, and therefore you're also going to look less judgmental and less jealous or angry on to the lives of others. You see their humanity because you see your own. And from there's genuine connection that can emerge with other people when you're able to make yourself vulnerable and open up to, your true sense of self. The reason this is so hard to do is because it requires something very, very counterintuitive. And it's to be honest with yourself. To be honest with yourself means to figure out where you are wrong. And by extension, where your sense of identity might be wrong. Most fights with your significant other, friends, or family are a product of your sense of identity being threatened, and they're not admitting that it's this what you're actually fighting about. When you tell somebody that they've behaved wrong and you criticize them, and then there's this automatic reaction that there's something to defend in them. And you also notice yourself when you're getting criticized. This is where the identity mechanism activates. And as you certainly know, it's very, very counterintuitive in the moment of a fight with another person to self-reflect or criticize yourself. The instinct for most people is to defend, especially if you're more of an assertive type of person. But some people also have it configured in the opposite direction. Especially a lot of women in the past were socially conditioned to never speak up, to never defend themselves and always take everything on the chin. So then, if you've been conditioned this way, then instead of defending yourself, what you actually do is you victimize yourself and you criticize yourself. So you find flaws even more easily and you basically put yourself down. This is also egoic. It is not humble. It is a way for your own sense of identity to be reinforced. And it's also a defensive mechanism. The looping of finding flaws in other people or in yourself is the main system of how the ego stays alive. It's not about thinking that you're the best. It's also thinking that you're the worst. Any sort of comparison with another person is always ego. If you're thinking you're better than somebody or worse than somebody, doesn't matter. The moment you're having thoughts or a visceral sensation that you're comparing yourself, know that something has activated your ego. The person who walks into a party and thinks that everyone is looking at them and they are going to judge their outfit and they are super self-conscious about it has as much ego as the person who thinks that they are the best looking person in the party. Both narratives are built on the same lie, that you are the center of the universe and you are basically what matters the most. Whether you are the hero or the victim of the story is not relevant. The ego is just the one writing the script and putting you in the center, when in reality, there is not really a center. Any sort of judgment toward any person in any moment is where you can detect ego at work. And when you can detect that, you're doing deep psychological work. It's a form of self-awareness that gives you the ability to react differently in the future and be more conscious about how other people feel as well. Because suddenly you're not so self-obsessed anymore, but you actually can see that, it's not all about you. There are a lot of things going on at the same time where identity doesn't actually play that much of a role. The funny thing is that everybody does this to a certain extent. Almost everything we receive from the outside world is a sort of judgment. And it's judgment because of their own ego architecture. How other people have structured their sense of self-identity is also just to protect themselves. And in a subtle way, people think that people should be more like themselves. Like saying, you should be more like me. Why are you not like this person or that person? Or I should be more like X person. I am not good enough. Parents often do this to their children from a very young age to tell them, you should be a doctor and you should fulfill the family legacy and then all children do for the rest of their life is keep comparing themselves to others, or if they're worthy enough for their parents, which conditions all of these ego dynamics for a very long time, as long as you don't become self-aware of them. And this is what we all do, and then we bump heads against each other because we're so swept up by our own ego narratives, by the script we are running in our head about who we are in our life. We don't just take a moment and breathe in and notice that we are actually just within ourselves. Because the moment you take a breath and stay in silence and look at what your mind is doing, you can notice something quite scary. And it's that 24/7, each single thought about what you think is true in some way is lying to yourself. And realizing that in subtle or egregious ways, that, yeah, all of your life has been kind of this consistent social lie, is very scary. Because the truth of an idea often is about a certain social dynamic or a certain social perspective, and then we construct our entire reality view from this perspective. And then we think about a ton of he said, she said, he thinks this about me, he said this to them, and then we construct this entire world of words in our heads. And then often it requires one experience to notice, wait, I've made it all up. The truth is not what is in my head. The narrative that I've been running is kind of just to soothe my own sense of identity, and this overthinking is kind of the product to orient myself within this made-up identity. Suddenly, it feels like you can't even trust your own mind. For example, you might be mad at a significant other because they didn't do the dishes, and now you think that they're lazy and disrespectful, and then that's a narrative you have in your head, and it's the clear reason why you're mad. I'm mad because they are being lazy. But if you take a deeper look at yourself, you might realize you're actually mad not because they didn't do the dishes or because now they reveal themselves to be a lazy person, but you might be terrified that if they don't do what you ask, it means that you don't matter enough to them. Your ego then feels kind of judged. You feel like you don't have the authority or the power or the worthiness to actually be listened to. And then your ego would rather stay angry and fight for an hour rather than to admit that you feel unloved. It lies to you, telling you that you are a victim of somebody else's laziness, just so it doesn't have to face the fragility of your own sense of self-worth. Another example is that you might have a very creative project going on, and you have put a lot of time in it, and now it comes time to share it. But instead of sharing it, you think that you need to work on it longer, and you procrastinate its actual release. And it feels very objectively the case that the project isn't ready, and that you need to work long on it so that's actually good. But in reality, it's not about the project at all, and you're just scared of your own judgment. The project is completely fine, and all you're doing is delaying the possibility of being judged and making yourself vulnerable. But you're completely blind to it, and you externalize the actual issue at hand. Your ego is sabotaging your growth because it would rather be a hidden genius or full of potential who never actually tries and puts itself out there, because then it could actually fail and reveal the new identity of being a failure. It creates a narrative of perfectionism to protect an identity that is too fragile to handle a no. Or you see somebody on social media who is incredibly successful, but they are also loud and obnoxious, and you immediately feel annoyed by their presence. So then you tell yourself that they're arrogant and shallow, and you're pretty certain that it's an objective observation. They are arrogant and shallow. But the radical honesty might be that you only hate the arrogance because you've spent your entire life suppressing your own need for attention. You really wanted to be somebody who also gets a lot of attention, but you have pushed this need down so far that you can't even remember that this is something that you actually want. So now when you see somebody else getting this attention, what you sense is moral disgust. You feel unresolved envy that doesn't even get expressed as envy. You only see anger and dislike. This is very common online. That's where most trolls and hatred actually comes from. It's always a sense of unresolved personal issue. You've built an identity around being humble, and their existence threatens the validity of that decision. Whenever you're able to find your own example within your own life, and are able to apply this vision to yourself, you're making deep progress in your own personal development, because it's unfathomably rare to have this level of self-awareness. It's the norm to be unaware about your own ego dynamics. Most people can't take constructive criticism. They rather stay in their own little bubble where they just get self-validated all the time. So the identity gets stronger and stronger, and any criticism to this identity can't even be computed. It's completely rejected or ignored. That's what the internet has facilitated and made way worse. Just because the ego has trained itself to think that it is synonymous with truth, so it can never be wrong about anything. If it's wrong, then the entire illusion breaks apart. The ego thrives on being vague. As long as you don't label what it is actually doing, or it is indirect about what it is, it can sneak past most people's detection. The moment you give it a clear, simple definition of what is happening, it loses power, because then it becomes concrete. And we understand instinctively that the ego likes being vague. So what we use as a countermeasure to judge other people in society is to use labels. We love to label other people because it makes everything quite easy. This person is just arrogant. Oh, this guy is evil. Oh, this guy is a liberal. This person is a conspiracy theorist. Or this guy is a feminist. Or he is a Nazi. All of these labels might be actually true, but also they might be completely irrelevant when it comes to the debate at hand, or what is the truth of a matter. The idea about labels is often just to dismiss everything else they say. If this person is just a feminist and you think all feminists are stupid, then you don't need to give them their attention. You've already put them into a box, and in this box everybody is wrong. Now you don't actually need to listen to them. But what you're actually dismissing isn't really not just the truth or what they're saying, but you're actually scared of fracturing your own sense of identity. We are using labels not to just dismiss others, but to not investigate ourselves. Because what if the other person has a valid point that you didn't see? Now you might have to restructure your entire sense of identity. And like I said, and will say multiple times, people don't like to do this. This way, you can give yourself a hall pass to never look into the mirror. It's basically the root of all hypocrisy. You're saying, because they are like that, I don't have to check if I'm also similar. Your mind convinces you that you are being a discerning, moral judge of character, when in actuality, you are just building a wall to keep your own identity safe from the discomfort of growth or change. Hence, everybody is stuck in their own miserable, unsatisfying life, because people can jump over themselves, when all you need to do is look inward. The way out is radical self-honesty, and the only way to do this is to see how honesty is threatening your own survival. This is a framework that I've developed, and it relates to your own personal sense of safety. That's why I will construct it as like a house with different layers. Within the architectural framework, we can say that there is a foundation, then there are the pillars holding the structure together, and then there's a roof, which represent the biological foundation, the social pillar, and the narrative, which is the roof. A lot of people make the mistake and think that ego is synonymous with the body. And in some sense, you can define it this way, because if you have a sense of being a human, you might say that a part of your identity is being a human. So you don't want to die, and therefore your ego is attached to your human bodily identity. But I do think that looking at it only from this lens is kind of misleading, because if you put your hand on a burning fire, you are reactively or instinctively going to put your hand away. And it doesn't require ego to do this. Your entire nervous system is going to do this on its own. It doesn't matter if your ego is strong or weak. What the ego actually gives you the ability to do is hold your hand in the fire longer and override your desire for survival out of pure arrogance or dominance or stubbornness. This is what, often strength does and strong egos do. They actually override the biological need for survival or not getting hurt through sheer strength and stubbornness. So to see how the ego relates to survival is also to understand that, it does relate to your biological survival, but it's actually more like a force that can override the biological mechanisms that are very much instinctual. But survival still is the main view, what makes the ego spawn out of social dynamics. Since we want to survive, but are social creatures, we build social hierarchies to maintain a certain dominance over other people. And to see oneself higher in the hierarchy means that you have more power and control over resources and, those people around you. Being threatened in your self-image then puts you into a submissive position, meaning a less powerful position, meaning that your chance of survival decreases. A healthy ego can submit when it's the right time and to let other people lead without it threatening the sense of survival, and be powerful and strong when the moment calls for it. So the biological survival needs are like the ground of where the ego is operating from. It's the foundational aspect, and then gets started to mix in with bodily autonomy and power for social hierarchies. But the social pillars and the biological pillars are deeply intertwined. The trick that the ego does is that it uses the excuses of biological survival to keep its sense of self alive, when it is actually not necessary for biological survival, as the body has a wisdom on its own. But from there, it constructs an entire identity of social hierarchies that move you into the social pillars, where they basically become divorced from the biological survival needs. But the ego then pretends that the social dynamics is basically the same, that how you're being perceived matters for your own survival, but it's actually not your biological survival anymore. It's just the social construct and, the social need for, hierarchical coherence. The social performer part of the ego then relates to how many boundaries do you keep in the face of others? How much are you willing to open up and make yourself vulnerable? Opening up leads to deeper connections in your relationships, but it also leads you to more judgment and vulnerability. True love can only be found when you're opening up to somebody, which requires the vulnerability to be shown and maybe reveal parts of your identity to others that you might have not been willing to do. This is doubly more difficult when you notice that they're actually part of your identity that you haven't even shown yourself. So how vulnerable you are with yourself is how deeply you can connect with other people. There are likely things you don't even admit to yourself that if you confront it, you actually panic or become anxious or you become ashamed, just you alone in a room. Now imagine having to open up to other people about it. It's extremely hard. So the ego again uses the mechanism of denial and reflection or projection, so you don't have to actually look inward and just can pretend it's the outer world that is the problem. That's why we usually see personally developed people as confident, because you can see that their sense of self is not dependent on how other people judge them, and it's very easy for them to be vulnerable because they have nothing to hide, because they have done the work alone in their own mind already. They know how to assert their own boundaries because they know how open they want to be, but it's completely free as they are not threatened by other people's pushing their boundaries. They know where the limits lie because they've done the internal work. And they also know how to be vulnerable because when they want to connect, then the vulnerability comes easy to them. An insecure ego is also very unattractive in the dating market. And it's what most people, and especially women, scan for in a man, because people often feel the need to manage somebody else's insecurity so that others do not feel uncomfortable. And if there is the sense that another person, especially a woman, needs to manage your own insecurities, it becomes automatically unattractive. You start to seem somebody who is not very secure in themselves and therefore not really secure for survival. And also vulnerability and intimacy starts to feel unsafe. This is a huge aspect of also what makes flirting fun, because if you flirt with somebody, you're always playing on this edge of discomfort and vulnerability. You're basically pushing the conversation into a space where you purposefully make others uncomfortable, because you know you're poking at their vulnerabilities, but you're doing it so skillfully that it's not so hard. You push the other person over the edge into sincerely boundary violating or uncomfortable territory. But you're also showing that you don't need to manage their insecurities because you don't need to manage your own. And there, this push and pull happens, in dating dynamics, where flirting becomes a lot of fun when both people are on the same wavelengths, and there's this constant push and pull of how vulnerable can we go, how uncomfortable or close and intimate can we become. So we have the biological foundation, we have the social pillars, and then to construct the house, we have the roof. And the roof would be your own internal landscape, how you protect yourself from the outside world or your biological sense of survival when you're alone in your own head. That's the narrative part of the mind that, just relates to itself. The roof is there to protect you from the rain and keep you warm. So it would narrate your life in a way that gives you a sense of familiarity and context, a sense of consistency for who you are and how you relate to yourself. If you want to have a more fulfilling life, but you have the belief that life just sucks, then this thinking that, existence sucks over a long period of time actually changes how you perceive the entirety of the structure, both the social one and your relationship to your own survival. If you want to have a more fulfilling life, but you believe that existence or life just sucks, then thinking that life sucks over a long period of time actually becomes comfortable. Despite it being discomforting and this sense of dislike being a subtle layer of suffering that is pervasive all of the time, it actually is like the roof breaking and telling you that something isn't right. There's dissonance and discoherence between the different layers of your ego architecture. When you think that you can be successful, or that you can make life better, or that existence isn't as dark as you look at it, your ego identity or the roof of your structure basically is leaking. And this leak might want to lead you to a better sense of self-relationship, but it will feel like suffering. It is not comfortable to change yourself because it requires to look inward and to be in the house and look at the roof and see that there's something broken there that needs fixing. Maybe you have to move houses in that you completely detach from your current environment and build something completely new, or you restructure the entire thing from the inside. I'd caution you, though, to not make rash decisions, as often a lot of people, when they go through some existential transformative stuff, want to make snap decisions about just, completely selling the house and moving somewhere else and then ending the relationship and divorcing the marriage. And often this is also just a way for the ego to reassert control over itself, and instead of actually seeing the relationship of what is actually going on. This can be the right choice to actually move out or change perspectives, but it's often best to not do this as like a quick or rash decision. And if you really need to do this in order to go ahead in your life, you can take some time to really ponder and reflect it, because I know some people who make very bad rash decisions just because they find a leak in the roof. Because it's really the relationship to yourself that needs to change at the end of the day. You can't always be content, even in unoptimal circumstances. Because at the end, it's really the relationship to yourself that needs to change. You certainly know a lot of famous people who have everything on paper, but feel miserable most of the time. And it's because it's not about your external circumstances at all. It's all about how do you relate to yourself? How do you think about your past? How do you relate to your biological survival, your existential narrative within the world, the meaning of life, and how do you see yourself within the relationships of other people? That's why in my ego architecture audit, I move people systematically through these different layers of identity and observe how people respond. Because the responses themselves reveal the structure of their own self-image. And since I've done this so often, I can see the same patterns reemerging. There are a lot of things that appear extremely obvious from the outside, but are completely invisible from the inside. And you certainly have seen this with other people, yourself, probably your parents, where it's very obvious what mechanisms are being at play there when they are being ignorant about something or not seeing something that's extremely obvious for you, but they themselves have been so much in their own ego pattern that it remains easily overlooked. And if you were to just point it out to them, they'd likely be offended or be triggered by it. That's why the only way to actually change is to want to change yourself. You need to want to look inward, or nothing of this works. Because we can be shocked time and time again how biased our own brains are, how limited we are in our thinking. And we need to understand that it's not because of some personal failure, that it is just something that that minds do. It's just part of our own mental architecture. But because we are just one particular person, one particular configuration of experience, we just can't know it all. There are so many perspectives on life, so many perceptions. So when you have a good friend or a therapist or like professional guidance, they can reveal stuff that you just cannot see yourself, which limits who you are into something quite specific. And it makes it hard to see how different life can be, how oddly different your entire sense of consciousness can be by doing existential internal ego work. And for most people, this work starts with a leap of faith that things can get better and that this better way of experiencing life is actually accessible to you. Because, of course, it is. Everybody operates on the same architecture, just that everybody has been built differently throughout their life. All you need to do is the willingness to look at yourself honestly. How much do you want to learn about yourself? Do you really want to see what you're made out of? What are you willing to understand about yourself and reality that at first glance might be uncomfortable and moves you into a direction of wholeness? Now, if you want to accelerate this ego work, then check out the PDF in the description where I clearly explain to you how my ego architecture audit works. Now, having said all of this, there's a crucial component that we have not touched yet that is extremely important for real change to occur, not just in yourself, but also in external reality and with other people, which is, what do you actually do after you've honestly observed yourself? How do you self-reflect in a way that doesn't just slowly destroy you from the inside because you lose all sense of identity or ground? Now, the real difficult aspect of this is behavioral. It's the emotional maturity you develop when doing this that aids to your sense of productivity and functioning and contentment within yourself. It's what aligns you with purpose without having to question yourself all the time. Which is to see that the ego can be fuel for creativity, joy, and the ability to use the selfishness for the benefit of other people. When moving away from these social dynamics or these internal personal narratives of thought, the ego is really something much simpler, and it's a contraction of sensations. It's a low-grade sense of discomfort you can sense in your body. A lot of people can sense it in their thoughts. That's why people ruminate in their thoughts so often, because the thoughts themselves are a contraction, which is like a hint that there's something in the organism that isn't structured coherently. Meaning that when you are in a bad mood, for example, and you feel this agitated sense that I'd rather not be here, I'd rather be somewhere else, which, of course, there's a wide spectrum in the sense, right? We can go from slight unease to anxiety to rage and actual mania. But while within this spectrum of wanting to be somewhere else, there's an experience. And looking into this experience directly is where the transformation lies. You know that the more emotionally mature a person is, the more they've spent time to form their own ego into something healthy, meaning that they've used introspection to shift their behavior. And the shift in behavior isn't just obsessing over thought, it is actually understanding what is causing the contraction, which at the end means to feel your emotions. It means to be really honest with what you're feeling and why you're feeling them. It's the ability to know what to do with these emotions that is emotional maturity. Emotional maturity or emotional intelligence is not to feel emotions. It's the entire opposite. The ability to express and talk about your emotions too is also what makes you appear very attractive and very charismatic to people, because again, you are very secure in yourself and you can communicate your own mind very well. And yeah, especially in a dating context, this is very noticeable and for some can be extremely intimidating. So that instead of raging at your partner or creating drama at work, you can pause and feel a feeling and be honest with yourself why you're feeling it without needing to lash out and without needing other people to validate it, which is again this like need for being seen the same way you see yourself. Like, I feel angry, so now I need to be validated for the fact that I am angry and that this feeling is supposed to be there. And I need other people to validate this for me instead of just saying, yeah, I'm allowed to be angry. Yeah, I'm allowed to be sad. Which is what will make your relationship to yourself 10 times better. And what then eventually will lead you to do the things that you found difficult to do. And that's what a lot of people check for generally in social dynamics as well. Like, how sovereign is the person? How much is he responsible and can put his mind to something and then finish it because he is understanding himself? How self-assured is your sense of self? Can I easily cause an emotional reaction out of him or her? It's also something that bullies like to do. It's just playing with others' egos. It's ego testing. And again, it's also what is so fun about flirting and sexual dynamics. Trying to map out where the other person's vulnerability lie, and sometimes being a bit mean is fun. But it also means that this sensation of your body that jolts when it feels like, oh, I don't like this, and then immediately wants to react and change that, is the ego itself. The necessity to control these contractions of the system is what the ego is trying to do all the time. That's why the emotions oftentimes lead to the strengthening of the ego, because instead of being able to just feel the emotion, you have to react to the emotion, meaning you kind of strengthen the system that says, if I feel sad, I need to eat sugar. And then this is linked. And it requires a lot of self-observation and will to be able to break the cycle. And often it relates also to emotional processing, which often happens when you don't want to do it, right? When you feel the instinct to, engage in a vice, that is where you can actually, meditate on what actually you're experiencing emotionally without having to cope. Right? That's the idea of the cope, to not have to engage with yourself, but engage with something external, to not have to do all of the self-reflection stuff. Now, on the biological level, it is natural if you put your hand in a fire that it hurts and you move away, like discussed before. That's why I wouldn't say that all reaction means it's ego. That's why I think this distinction is very important. A lot of it is just the body doing what bodies do. It's quite healthy for a body to react in a certain way. This also doesn't mean that being hyper self-aware all the time means to be always paralyzed and doubting your intuition. Like, the intuition comes very naturally if your ego is healthy, and you overthink what you do if the ego is unharmonized. And then, it's self-conscious in a destructive way. You're not just self-aware, but you're worrying all the time. Okay, if I do this, then this person might think I'm an idiot. But if I do this, then this person might think I'm too weak. And then you're not actually acting out of just a solid sense of self, but you're acting just, again, trying to control how other people perceive you. It's also why people usually feel very bad about themselves when they procrastinate and don't do what they're supposed to do. Because this sense that you're supposed to do something is kind of like both deeper wisdom, telling you that, hey, if you actually want to change character and change how other people look at you and perceive you, well, then you need to change what you do. Like, you need to actually put some skin in the game and go for the run, or study for the test, or build this business, or talk to this guy, or fire this person. And it actually shifts then how you're being perceived. Suddenly you are somebody that can fire somebody in a difficult situation, or can go for a run when you are looking overweight, because you don't need somebody to give you the permission. You just do it on your own. But a part of it is also your ego keeping you stuck in the same identity. Procrastination is the self-doubt that is telling you that you're not going to be able to accomplish it, and then it reinforces itself by making you not accomplish it, when what you're trying to do might be actually very simple. It's this contrast between knowing that what you're trying to do is actually quite simple, like you could just go out and go for a run, but mentally it feels like a huge blockade because you've been procrastinating this for weeks and weeks and weeks. So now you're so stuck in this identity. But it also is good news because it shows that just one small decision actually can break a complete cascade apart. Because if you just go for a run once, now you are the person who can do this. That's why change doesn't require this huge action or this idea of consistency. All it requires you to do is do something you have not done before. Therefore, rewriting the ego narrative in the most effective way for also other people, like so that it actually changes how other people perceive you, well, it requires action. If you think you have been cheating yourself out of a healthy life because you've been self-sabotaging your own health, the only way to change this identity is to make a different decision more often. And then the momentum of this different decision changes your identity for others and yourself, which is then a positive feedback loop. That's where fake it till you make it somewhat works. You can use the tendency for the ego to delude yourself as your own advantage here. Ignore the parts of your character that you dislike, that you want to keep in the past, and then act differently and focus on your new-found actions. An entire new world of behaviors then suddenly opens up. Now, there's much more to say about the ego that I won't be able to cover just in this one guide. It's really my entire life's work at this point. There's a lot of esoteric mysticism too that is found in here as well. How the sense of spirituality relates to the ego, and how you can feel merging with consciousness or merging with existence when your ego starts to dissolve. How your sense of conscious awareness literally expands when doing this work right. How blissful it can be to finally understand a new part of yourself. There's so many facets to this personal development work. And if you don't want to miss anything that I put out, then check out my Substack, where I go even deeper into this stuff. This entire YouTube channel of mine has been built with lots of sweat and tears, and I can't really put into words of how many hours of self-work and working with other people it required to be so comfortable and authoritative about this topic, and to have studied hands-on what it really means to go into all of this existential and personal work, how existentially troubling it can really be from the individual's perspective, how you have to confront some very dark things about the nature of reality. And the way I'm doing this work now in this like very objective or architectural mechanistic framing is because I saw a problem between the very cold and psychoanalytical and the superstitious religious aspect of it all. Because on the psychoanalytical part, people are often, very cold. And I know a lot of people aren't very satisfied with how therapy doesn't go deep enough, and they don't really address these very existential topics. People pathologize, like therapists often pathologize their clients when they start to talk about the nature of existence or consciousness or psychedelics and all of this very esoteric stuff. But it feels very real from the inside when you start to merge with existence or have your sense of consciousness expanding, or you feel disassociative, or ponder about existential questions on a philosophical matter, well, they deeply relate to how all of this ego stuff works, and you cannot just brush them away as, psychosis. And this way, all of this existential philosophical stuff gets intertwined with psychoanalysis, but psychoanalysis alone often just doesn't do it justice. And then all these spiritual frameworks connect us to something larger than ourselves, but also make self-delusion so much easier. All of the self-deception mechanism become often way worse the moment people develop some sort of spiritual ego, because deconstructing a spiritual ego is even more painful and more full of delusion and more full of arrogance that people are very, very certain they have overcome. And the desire to then also keep looking inward to yourself and keep wondering how you're deceiving yourself is something that just very few people honestly can do. That's also why people don't like religions, because they use all of these ego mechanics to go on and say that, they say, I'm not telling you my opinion, I'm telling you God's opinion. So either you listen to me or you just, go to hell. It's this immense amount of pretentiousness that starts to come with this entire topic of ego. And I'd like to strip all of this away and show how, sincere egolessness or the transparency of ego can actually look like and how it serves you. And interestingly enough, this pretentiousness itself is deeply rich territory when you are wondering about your sense of identity and how you're relating to yourself. If you notice your own pretentiousness and your arrogance, which is always going to happen when doing ego work, and you still want to investigate, then you certainly are going to go deep and at the end become a very sovereign, happy, and satisfying individual. It's just, a very serious thing to do, to deconstruct a person like that. And this is why all that matters is your own desire for this deconstruction. Like, imagine a religious person who believes God is the highest authority and they have direct access to this highest authority. Imagine deconstructing that. For a lot of people, that would just put them in a completely delusional or lost space, which is also why I'm not even advocating that you need to do this. All you really want to do is deconstruct your sense of identity as much as you feel happy and content and can function in the world and be of use to either yourself or other people. There's no need to be anything but a human that, is happy. So all you want to do is have your survival secured in a physical, material world that needs food and money and all of the stuff. And then on the other level, to be self-sovereign, which after a certain level, you just are happy, and all of this work isn't necessary anymore, but relates more to self-actualization, which is the biggest and highest form of fulfillment possible. Meaning that after a certain degree of just contentment, all ego work is pure bonus, pure personal development, and existential curiosity. Then being able to manage yourself better is really about self-actualization, to be the most fulfilled person you could possibly be. Bliss-maxing would be a Zoomer word for it. But for this, people need to first see that this shit is real and there's actually a way to understand it on a deeper layer than most people do. And suddenly you notice how deep all of the stuff really goes. Your reality, your sense of self, your social relationships, everything intimately interconnected. And the deeper you realize this, the deeper your sense of aliveness is going to be. And if you want to have a guide where you deeper understand these egoic functions with a slideshow presentation to visualize all of this better, you can watch said work here.